preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Thank you. The sun also rises. Sons and lovers, all my sons, Dombian sons, a prayer for my daughter, Sister Carrie, the brothers Karamazov, the brothers Grimm, Uncle Vanya, Uncle Remus, Uncle Tom, Uncle Scrooge, Life with Father, Père Goriot, Mother Goose, Mother Courage, the red badge of courage, the red and the black, Black boy, black beauty, pale horse, pale rider, riders to the sea, horsemen passed by. Goodbye to all that. Goodbye, Columbus. A farewell to arms. Legs diamond. Hands Christian Andersen. The skin of our teeth, the mill on the floss. The fountain head, the bluest eye, the horse's mouth, Howard's End. Moby Dick, tasteless. Swan's Way, Rabbit Run, see how they run, see how they fall. Some came running, fear of flying. Sailing to Byzantium, east of Eden, under western eyes, north toward home. You can't go home again, go tell it on the mountain, the magic mountain. The snows of Kilimanjaro, the works of C.P. Snow. The works of Claude Rains. Hat full of rain, gone with the wind, a high wind in Jamaica, the wind in the willows, the country of the pointed firs, desire under the elms, the life of Marla Maples. Another part of the forest, splendor in the grass, leaves of grass, Gunter grass, ironweed, into the woods. The march of the wooden soldiers, middle March, April in Paris, 7 days in May, light in August. The autumn of the patriarch, after the fall, the winter of our discontent. The life of Suzanne Summers. Summer and smoke, war and peace, crime and punishment, decline and fall, Franny and Zoe, the old man in the sea, on the beach, life of George Sand. To the lighthouse, wait until dark, darkness at noon, love in the afternoon, tender is the night, morning becomes Electra. Sunday morning, sons and lovers, the sun also rises. Books, books, books. Stacks of them, shelves of them, piles of the things. Books sold in supermarkets, books sold in airports, books that come in packages that blow stuffing in your face. Books on the night table, books on the coffee table. A coffee table book, Beans, the life of Juan Valdez. Books in a briefcase, books in a sack, books on your back, books on tape, books on trains, picture books, pop-up books, coloring books, cookbooks, crook books. Richard Nixon's I Am Not a Crook book. Travel books, paperbacks, telephone books. I'd like to put out a cellular telephone book, hang it on a chain around your neck. Paperbacks, Morocco bounds. Poetry, history, psychology, philosophy, sociology, biology, science books. Don't know much about science books. Fairy tales, tattletales, biography, autobiography, our lives. Our lives are open books. You can't tell a book by its cover. Bell, Book, and Candle, the book of knowledge, the book of life, the book of love. Who wrote the book of love? What you don't know would fill a book. Close the book on her, throw the book at him. If they asked me, I could write a book for a considerable advance. We're all booked up. We're in the book. We're booked. Bibliomania, crazy about books. Technically, the term means crazy about book collecting, but our madness goes way beyond that. It's a passion, an obsession. It starts in our childhood. We will die clutching the things. Leigh Hunt, the 19th century writer, wanted to be caught dead holding a book. He was. Plato reportedly was found with a book under his pillow, Petrarch with his elbow resting on an open page. These books were their ways of extending themselves, of going on. Go, little book, wrote Chaucer at the end of Troilus and Cressida, sending his book on a journey no mortal can complete. I know that I shall die reading a book. Something by M. Scott Peck, M.D. In my parents' house when I was a child, they had this high bookcase. Long before I could read, I'd climb the bookcase, throw the books down behind me, jump to the carpet, and look at the pictures in the book. They had this set of books called Childcraft, orange books, full of pictures of things, teaching kids how to make things, make different things. I was always perplexed by the picture of a man making a violin. He made a violin. Strung the instrument, polished the wood, shaped the wood, chopped down the tree, I suppose, murdered the cat. I remember wondering, how's a kid supposed to do all that? Stayed in my childhood, through grade school, through high school, through college. Passion finally came to a head in Ireland. Many things do. Spent the academic year 1965 studying in Ireland. Well, I studied some of the time. It was, after all, my first trip to Europe, in which, in spite of what the English tell you, Ireland is included. It was my first trip, my wife Ginny's too. There was so much else to do than study. There was basketball, for one thing. For me, not for Ginny. I played basketball for the University College Dublin basketball team. We used to scrimmage against the cops, the Dublin cops. Cops did not know how to play basketball, but they did know how to hit you very hard in the side of the head, knocking you to the floor, which was made of slate, knocking you to the slate. This would be followed by much good-natured laughter. Theirs. I was the only Rosenblatt to make the Irish team. Hard as this may be to believe. I tell you this because my name became an odd little burden in Ireland, culminating in a story about books. See, nobody could pronounce my name in Ireland. The bank manager with whom I dealt didn't even try. He had a hard enough time understanding what I was doing in the country in the first place. I explained to him a check would be coming for my education every month. I nodded, he nodded. They're paying you to go to school. They're paying you to go to school. Could you let me have that one more time? The postman in our neighborhood at least made an attempt to pronounce my name, but he always chickened out on the final syllable. Ah, good morning, Mr. Rosenbubble. Can't blame the Irish for the hard time they had with my name. I've always had a hard time with my name. It's an unwieldy name, a cumbersome name, Rosenblatt. A Rosen is all right. Rosen, redolent of flowers, bouquet of rosens. Subject was Rosen. A Rosen for Emily. Rosenbud. But the Blatt. The Blatt. The Blatt always makes the name sound like an overripe pumpkin dropped to the sidewalk from the roof of a cheap hotel. Rosen. Blatt. So I can hardly blame the Irish for the hard time they had with my wild Irish Rosenblatt, even when it came to that business at the book auction. Ginny and I had never been to a book auction before. One evening we found ourselves walking around St. Stephen's Green, came to a vast 19th century hall filled with people, filled with books, a book auction. I go inside, I see a book I have always wanted, Flann O'Brien's masterpiece comic novel, At Swim Two Birds. We think, what the hell, we'll stay. We stood behind the throng. The auctioneer was in front. The books were in stacks, glowing, gleaming like stacks of freshly baled hay. The light outside going down, the light inside rising. Not only had Ginny and I never been to a book auction before, I had never been to any kind of auction before that. The only auctions I'd ever seen were in the movies. In the movies, as you know, the hero always runs away from killers in the auction. In North by Northwest, Cary Grant, to whom I've always compared myself. What's so funny about that? Cary Grant runs away from killers in an art auction. In The Coconuts, the Marx Brothers' first movie, The Coconuts, Chico gets so excited in an auction, he winds up bidding against himself. Finally boasting, I got plenty of numbers. For my auction, which soon established its character somewhere between Cary's and Chico's, the drill was this. The auctioneer would call out a book, you would bid on your book. If you won, you would be asked to call out your name, a clerk would inscribe your name. At the end of the auction, you'd go and pick up your book. Sure enough, he comes to At Swim Two Birds. I bid, I win. In my first book auction, for a couple of pounds, I get the book I wanted. I was feeling very happy and not a little smug, having done so well at my first book auction. When the auctioneer calls out, "Name, please." "Rosenblatt." There is a terrible silence. "Name, please." "Rosenblatt," I say, a little shakily, thinking of the bank manager and the postman. The throng, which had been standing away from us, now turned towards us. "Sir," cried the auctioneer. "Sir," the Irish can be savagely polite. "Could you let us have that one more time?" Us. Could you let us have that one more time? The entire country of Ireland was demanding that I pronounce my name. I began to see my name as an ancient sword drawn from some stone, the Rosenstone. In Poland or Russia or Germany or wherever it was my family came from, not that they'd ever say. Rosenberg Excaliblat. The sword flipping hilt over blade down through the centuries till it finally lands in my hand. I, the last of the Mohican Blats. Ready to do honor to my family of rabbis or horse thieves or whatever we were. In the land of the O'Hoolahans, the Chavons, and the Sineads. Ach, the Sineads. Rosenblatt, Rosenblatt, Rosenblatt. The silence is as deep as the grave. The auctioneer bows his head in embarrassment. The crowd turns away. The clerk inscribes a name. At the end of the auction, I go and pick up my book. There on the package is the name clearly inscribed. Frozenwem. With 2 M's. I have kept it to this day. You might think that such an experience would dampen your affection for books. Hardly. Because as Ginny and I were walking around St. Stephen's Green, we were, after all, walking around St. Stephen's Green. St. Stephen's Green, where James Joyce had railed against another country, his own country. Where Sean O'Casey had railed against the British. Where W.B. Yeats had preened and postured. Yeats was so self-absorbed, he used to sign his checks, "Yours sincerely, W.B. Yeats." St. Stephen's Green, where Lady Gregory dreamed of establishing an Irish theater, and John Millington Synge dreamed of ways to grace it, and where? In the wild, fantastic caverns of his mind, Flann O'Brien, or Miles Nagopoline, as he sometimes called himself, or Brian O'Nulon, which is the name he was born with, conceived at Swim Two Birds, which I was carrying next to me like an extra set of ribs. We carry our books as we carry our names, as close as our hearts. Bibliomania, then. Crazy about books. I'm crazy, and for this evening I hope to make you crazy too. Since you are here, I imagine that you have a head start. You certainly have a head start. And why not? Why shouldn't we be crazy? We are print people. We like to think. We like things to be difficult. We never throw out a book, not even one by Joseph Campbell. We hate it when we have to sell a book, even one by M. Scott Peck, M.D. We like the looks of books, the smell, the texture of books, the sexiness of books. People only curl up with one of 2 things. We like the subterfuge of books. Books are spies, so orderly on the outside, so dangerous within. The innocent page. The innocent page. The innocent page of Freud, the innocent page of Darwin, the innocent page of Tom Paine, the innocent page of Mary Shelley, the innocent page of Mein Kampf. What goes on in the silence between the eye and the innocent page? What does not go on? And the page starts coming to you. What do you do with that page in your silence? And it doesn't matter what kind of book we're talking about. Political theory, history, poetry, science fiction. Science fiction. Here's H.G. Wells, beginning the War of the Worlds, describing a Martian who lands on Earth. Those of you who have never seen a living Martian can scarcely imagine the strange horror of its appearance. The peculiar V-shaped mouth with its pointed upper lip, the absence of brow ridges, the absence of a chin beneath the wedge-like lower lip, the incessant quivering of this mouth, the gorgon groups of tentacles, the tumultuous breathing of the lungs in a strange atmosphere, the evident heaviness and painfulness of movement due to the greater gravitational energy of the earth. Above all, the extraordinary intensity of the immense eyes, at once vital, inhuman, crippled, and monstrous. We love the strategies. Those of you who have never seen a living Martian, as compared with those of you who have, of course. We like the tricks. I'm just now reading Patricia Cornwell's first mystery post-mortem. She has as her hero Case Scarpetta, a coroner. And here's Case Scarpetta driving to work in the middle of the night in the city morgue. The white clock face floated like a full moon in the dark sky, rising high above the old domed train station, the railroad tracks, and the I-95 overpass. The great clock's filigree hand stopped when the last passenger train did many years before. It was 12:17. It would always be 12:17 in the city's lower end, where Health and Human Services decided to erect its hospital for the dead. Health, Human Services, Hospital for the dead. We like words, the use of words, the sound of words. Here's Mary Ann Evans, called herself George Eliot, more subterfuge still, beginning Middlemarch. Who that cares much to know the history of man has not dwelt, at least briefly, on the life of Saint Teresa, has not smiled with some gentleness at the thought of the little girl walking forth one morning, hand in hand with her still smaller brother, to go and seek martyrdom in the country of the Moors. Out they toddled, wide-eyed and helpless-looking as two fawns, but with human hearts already beating to a national idea, until domestic reality met them in the shape of uncles. Uncles. Thud. Uncles. Reality. We like words, the sound, the touch, the texture of words. Crooks, flux, flax, quacks, quark, 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 uncle. In the beginning was the Word, and in the end was television. I have tried to like television, honest I have, but television forbids it. As far as I can tell, there is but one show on television, Murder, She Wrote. Every half hour, Murder, She Wrote. Angela Lansbury and Murder. Tonight, Jessica solves the Kennedy assassination. Oh, there are other shows I know, Barbara Walters specials. Every show is a special. Tonight, Barbara shows you the Warren Christopher you only thought you knew. The ads, of course, are the best. I love Cher's ads. The singer Cher, the actress Cher. Cher does ads for Equal, the artificial sweetener, Equal. It tastes sweet on things, says Cher. Or variously, it makes things taste sweet. I can forgive Cher anything, though, after her explanation of why she supported Ross Perot in the last election. I just have a soft spot for short, crazy men. At night, the ads grow positively weird. I mean, late at night. There are these ads for the Psychic Friends Network. You have seen these. My fellow insomniacs have seen these. Dionne Warwick, the singer turned psychic, comes forward to introduce a man who picked up a woman in the supermarket. Seems he called his psychic friend. The psychic friend predicted he'd pick up a woman in the supermarket. So he did. Mere coincidence or psychic phenomenon? Followed by another episode of Murder, She Wrote. In this episode, Warren Christopher strangles Cher in the supermarket. Says guest star Dionne Warwick, I told you this would happen. You see these new bookstores, the big bookstores, superstores, Barnes & Noble superstore. I think they are trying to imitate television or get its market. They're so big and busy. At least it's my theory. 32,000 square feet, hundreds of thousands of books. Big, big, big. I went down to this superstore on 83rd and Broadway. Read about it. Immediately having read about it, of course, I was prepared to hate it. I loved it. Little nooks, niches for reading, wood from floor to ceiling. My taste was absolutely predictable, and they predicted it. I like the old stores best. Went down to the Strand the other day. Hadn't been down to the Strand for many years. A little disappointed. As soon as I got in, I saw a man standing behind a shiny metal gate, a uniformed guard who looked like Steven Seagal, without the charm. Then they took my package away. My package was the size of an average birthday card, but they thought I'd walk off with a collected trollop. No sooner was I in, I saw this great bookcase, high bookcase full of elegant sets of books. It was right behind the counter. I started to go toward it. I was stopped by a young woman who looked like a collected trollop herself. You can't go behind. I just want to look at the books. You can't go behind. Can he go behind? No, you can't go behind. I just wanted to look at the books. You can't go behind. It's against the rules. Well, tell me, says I, who's beginning to feel like a war vet entering McDonald's. How is someone to know if he wants to buy those books if he can't read the titles? Karen and Cubby conferred. Finally, the male said, we could read the titles to you. Fine, says I. Please read me every one of those titles. There were at least 30 sets of books. And make it slow. So the two relented and then let me into the Holy Land, by which time I was heaving with scorn and bitterness, not because of the kindergarten cops, but because the world of downtown bookstores had come to this. God, I used to love that world. In school, I never opened a book, but I'd go down to those stores. Great, mysterious places, talk about mysteries. And a blue fog in the back, hills of books, mountains, Alps of books. And in the front, some gnarled Dickensian proprietor huddled over some gnarled Dickensian desk, arguing with some crony of his about Russia, always about Russia. Do you know where they keep Carlyle's Frederick the Great? A customer would breeze in. The old man would wave him or her in the general direction of the books. That dismissive wave my grandfather used to give me every time I asked him about our family history, our glorious family name. I never wondered why those stores went out of business as much as how they ever stayed in. I pictured the day they all closed down. I imagine, of course, they all closed the same day. The owners of the land, tiring of not being paid rent for the last 27 years, deciding to level the place. The old men lifted on mile-high cranes high above the city, still arguing with each other about Trotsky. When the crane operators asked where they wanted to be deposited, they waved their arms in the general direction of down. Sour as those pusses were, I miss them. The people who run the news stores are nicer, but the stocks are worse. 5 books of poetry, 3 whole walls devoted to personal growth. Personal growth. They're always sex books, so I assume the term applies mainly to men. Personal growth. I went down to the superstore, looked at the personal growth section, saw a book called How to Satisfy Your Woman Every Time, Yet Make Her Beg for More. There's a logical contradiction in that, but why be petty? There's another book called How to Drive Your Woman Wild in Bed. I've always found short sheeting to be effective. There was a book called Think and Grow Rich, very funny. So a wonderful juxtaposition of books. One book was called How to Make Love All the Time. That one was next to Women and Fatigue. And those two were next to It Only Takes One. Then there was a book called You Are Your First Name. Not if your last is Frozenwem. Test of a good bookstore, don't you think, is could you fall in love there? Say the way Fred Astaire falls in love with Audrey Hepburn in Funny Face. Or what's his name with Amy Irving in Crossing Delancey. Or Rod Taylor with Maggie Smith in Young Cassidy. Impressive as they are, nobody's ever going to fall in love in a superstore. Maybe Christopher Reeve. Anyway, that day I was down in the Strand after I got over my momentary annoyance. I went among the books. The Strand still has a wonderful collection of books. Monumental collection. Ransom, Eliot, Pound, Elizabeth Bishop, Marion Moore, Ralph Ellison, Delmore Schwartz. To think that I used to know that group as moderns. They have the modern library books still down there, the old modern library books. The blues and the greens of the covers dulled by the sweat of hands of teenagers of the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, to colors unspeakably beautiful. I found a book down there, Modern Library Giant. Look at this color. What color is that? Modern Poetry, Anthology of Modern Poetry, modern as of 1938. And the anthologist did something very interesting. He included in the book, as a poem, it was not a poem, of course, Bartolomeo Vanzetti's last speech to the court. Sacco and Vanzetti had been sentenced to death for being anarchists, bomb throwers. Vanzetti was given the opportunity to give one last speech to the court. So here's Vanzetti in his broken English. Speaking to the court, he refers in the speech, by the way, to Katzman, who is the judge. I have talked a great deal of myself, but I even forgot to name Sacco. Sacco, too, is a worker. From his boyhood, a skilled worker, lover of work. With a good job and pay, a bank account, a good and lovely wife, 2 beautiful children, and a neat little home at the verge of a wood near a brook. Sacco has never dreamt to steal, never to assassinate. He and I have never brought a morsel of bread to our mouths from our childhood to today which has not been gained by the sweat of our brows. Never. Oh yes, I may be more witful, as some have put it. I am a better babbler than he is. But many, many times, in hearing his heartful voice ringing a faith sublime, in considering his supreme sacrifice, remembering his heroism, I felt small in the presence of his greatness. This man called thief and assassin and doomed. But Sacco's name will live in the hearts of the people and in their gratitude when Katzman's bones and yours will be dispersed by time. When your name, his name, your laws, institutions, and your false God are but a dim remembering of a cursed past in which man was wolf to the man. If it had not been for these things, I might have lived out my life talking at street corners to scorning men. I might have died, unmarked, unknown, a failure. Now we are not a failure. This is our career and our triumph. Never in our full life could we hope to do such work for tolerance, for justice, for man's understanding of man as we do now, by accident. Our words, our lives, our pain, nothing. The taking of our lives, lives of a good shoemaker and a poor fish peddler, all. That last moment belongs to us. That agony is our triumph. Deep in the stacks of Strand, I came upon a man who reminded me of one of the old proprietors of the old stores. He was looking at a wall of books as if at a temple wall, covered with hieroglyphics, with runes. I wanted to embrace him. He would have slapped me, of course. Do you know where they keep the books about Russia? I asked him, to see if I could light a light. He waved me in the general direction of the past. If they asked me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met so the world would never You know the song? Sing the song with me. And the simple secret of the plot is just to I said, sing the song with me. Don't look at me singing this song. Is just to tell them that I love you a lot. Then the world discovers as my book ends how to make two lovers of friends. Now give yourselves a hand. Oh, I wonder, wonder, who-ba-doo, who, boom. Correct, sincere, and pathetic, only because unaccompanied. Oh, I wonder, wonder, who-ba-doo, who, boom. Oh, better by degrees. Book of love, the love of books. Libraries. Libraries, like bookstores, are great institutions. Test of a good library is, could you fall in love there? Say the way Audrey Hepburn falls in love with George Peppard in Breakfast at Tiffany's, having read his short stories in the New York Public Library. The short stories of George Peppard. Forward by Mr. T. The Ghostbusters choose the New York Public Library as their first haunt. Excellent choice. In Goodbye Columbus, in the movie, there's a lovely romantic library scene. Libraries. So warm and cold, embracing and distancing. The books are yours. The books are everyone's. James Baldwin, in his wonderful autobiographical novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, has his character, who is Baldwin, John Grimes, 8-year-old boy. He likes to go down to the New York Public Library and look at the lions. He doesn't know whether the lions are there to protect him once he's in the library, or are they there to keep him out. He loved this street, not for the people or the shops, but for the stone lions that guarded the great main building of the public library, a building filled with books and unimaginably vast, which he had never yet dared to enter. He might, he knew, for he was a member of the branch in Harlem and was entitled to take books from any library in the city. But he had never gone in, because the building was so big it must be full of corridors and marble steps, in the maze of which he would be lost and never find the book he wanted. And then everyone, all the white people inside, would know that he was not used to great buildings or to many books, and they would look at him with pity. He would enter on another day, when he had read all the books uptown, an achievement that would, he felt, lend him the poise to enter any building in the world. Nice. Most perplexing libraries are presidential libraries, no? With a few exceptions, it's hard to think of presidents who read books, much less collected enough to fill a library. Wilson, Madison, Jefferson, of course, whose books became the basis of the Library of Congress, Kennedy. Jimmy Carter used to talk about his affection for Dylan Thomas, but Dylan Thomas's books wouldn't fill a library. More like a case of booze. That always seemed like an odd pairing, didn't it? Jimmy Carter and Dylan Thomas. Carter had lust in his heart. Thomas had it everywhere else. And Jimmy Carter, for all his generous good deeds, was a very dull man. Dylan Thomas was anything but dull. A friend once recalled a drinking binge that he and Thomas had undertaken in the Scottish Isles. For 2 days straight, they drank. For 2 days straight, Thomas talked. At the end of the second day, he finally stopped, looked about, and said, "Somebody's boring me. I think it's me." Jimmy Carter Library, I'm told, is introduced by a videotape narrated by Cliff Robertson. I'd like to see that. Still, there is a Carter Library and a Ford Library and a Reagan Library. At Yale, there used to be a sign outside the library that read, "This is not the library. The library is inside." At the Reagan Library, I imagine there's a sign outside that reads, "This is the library." The Nixon Library gets the most ink, the most attention. That, too, is introduced by a videotape narrated by Pat Robertson, I suppose. Whatever the Nixon Library lacks in books, it does have Tricia Nixon's wedding gown and the gazebo in which she was married to Edward Cox. See if you find that in every library. In the gift shop attached to the Nixon Library, they sell T-shirts bearing Nixon's and Elvis Presley's picture on them, commemorating the day that Nixon made Elvis an honorary agent in the war on drugs. I could not make this stuff up if I tried. Clintons have added to the library in the White House, we read. They have put shelves in, adding to those put in by Millie, I suppose. Still, it's nice to think of the Clintons in the White House, their books, their house, our house. Hillary Clinton is said to have picked up Bill Clinton in the Yale Law School library. Interesting to speculate how history would have changed had she spotted Alan Dershowitz. Still, the best libraries are our home libraries, no? No matter how paltry the collections, no matter how incomplete, the books are ours. They're connected to our lives. This is why there is probably no more frightening sight in the world than that of a guest in one's house scanning your books. The eyes go up and down the shelves. The hand reaches to where the eyes have led it. You hear the question even as it forms. Would you mind if I borrowed this book? Mind! Why should I mind? The fact that I bought that book in Paris in 1969 in the afternoon, I believe it was drizzling, that I scoured all Europe and North America for that particular copy, that it is dog-eared to passages that mean more to me than my fondest wishes, my deepest dreams, my life itself. Should I mind that you want to take that from me? Oh, no, no, no. Enjoy it. Thanks, I'll bring it back next week. Take your time, liar. This practice of borrowing books, it goes back. Charles Lamb, who never got angry at anything, railed against book borrowers, called them savages, spoilers of the symmetry of shelves. I know it goes back further. It goes back to the beginning. Say, Gutenberg, what's that? And may I borrow it? The practice is so strange. Unlike anything else, if you lend money, you feel empowered. If you borrow it, you feel a debt. Not so with books. With books remove all memory and guilt from the transaction. You'd think I'd know this by now. You know? Can the practice be thwarted? Borrowing books? There are attempts. People put ex libris stickers in their books. Ex libris, and under it little pictures of forest animals, a rabbit or a squirrel wearing glasses. Adorable and pointless. And under it your name in Latin. Ex libris Rosenblattimus. As if the imprint of Latin would be enough to scare off a book borrower. Some people put books they really cherish in false covers. You have Cry the Beloved Country. You put it in a false cover that reads, Utility Rates in Ottawa, A Multicultural Perspective by M. Scott Peck, M.D. It makes no difference. It isn't the absence of a book. Every book. It isn't the quality. Every book counts. Every absence has a crater. Books mean so much to us. They are our lives. They're attached to our lives. Is there any sight more beautiful than that of a child reading a book? The past and the future entrancing each other. How many people have fallen in love at the sight of someone reading a book? How many of you have fallen in love at the sight of someone reading a book? Knowing all this, shouldn't we change our attitude on this practice? Be more generous. The ancient clerics, they did not put ex libris in their books. They put ad usam, for the use of. Should we not follow the ancient clerics and be generous with our books? Give them gladly to anybody who wants them. Or should we just once be honest in this matter? And when somebody asks, would you mind if I borrow this book? Give them the words of Anatole France. Never lend books, said Anatole France. No one ever returns them. The only books I have in my library are the ones others have lent me. Ode. Ode on the smell of a book. No smell's as sweet as an old book smell. That smell is swell. I tell you, swell. Like the deep, rich fragrance of an antique bench, there's something intoxicating about that stench. Be it volume, set, or toma, deep infection, that aroma. I sniff the pages as if they're roses. Oh, God, please grow me 3 more noses. Yet as I sniff, my heart, it sinks. The smell is swell, the book, it stinks. And if this poem needs a coda, don't call it an ode. Call it an oda. Libraries, institutions, sellers of books, borrowers of books. The culture of books. There is, as we know, a whole culture of books. Musicals made by books, of books, movies made of books, plays made of books, musicals. Books made of books. Given the popularity of plagiarism these days, books made of books. Still, musicals are the best. Oliver, based loosely on Oliver Twist. Cats, based loosely on T.S. Eliot. The Wiz, based loosely on Nobody Beats the Wiz. I wish there were more musicals based on books. Beowulf. You took the monster out of the sea, wolf. Or Moby Dick, Whale-a-mania. Or Lolita. You are 13, I am 46. I'll take care of you. Book tours. Book tours are part of the book culture. There are no more humiliating experiences in the world than book tours. People who interview you have never read the book, of course. They only ask one question. It's not even a question. Tell us what your book is about. Tell us what your book is about, Mr. Tolstoy. It certainly looks like a doorstopper. Tell us what your book on the Paris sewers is about, Mr. Hugo. I hear it's a real downer. Book tours are the inventions of book editors. Writers never have good things to say about book editors. The bad things are only about 98% deserved. George Plimpton has a wonderful collection of things said among writers and editors and publishers, the Writer's Chapbook. Here is Karl Marx's publisher writing him from Leipzig. Dear Herr Doctor, you are already 10 months behind with the manuscript of Capital, which you have agreed to write for us. If we do not receive the manuscript within 6 months, we shall be obliged to commission another writer to do the work. Like A.A. Milne, I suppose. Here's a rejection note from a Chinese publisher, perhaps the sweetest rejection note in existence. Sir, we have read your manuscript with boundless delight. If we were to publish your work, it would be impossible for us to publish any work of lower standard. And as it is unthinkable that in the next 1,000 years we shall see its equal, we are, to our regret, returning it. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote to Maxwell Perkins, the great editor, about The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald said that the book would fail commercially for 2 reasons. First, the title is only fair, rather bad than good. Second, and most important, the book contains no important woman character, and women control the fiction market at present. Then Fitzgerald added, I don't think the unhappy ending matters particularly. If you think that shows what a poor business sense Fitzgerald had, the royalties from The Great Gatsby in 1927 were $55.65. In 1928, $44.16. And in 1929, $5.10. My idea of a good editor, said John Cheever, is a man I think charming who sends me large checks, praises my work, my physical beauty, my sexual prowess, and who has a stranglehold on the publisher and on the bank. By editor, wrote Vladimir Nabokov, I assume you mean proofreader? One story not contained in Plimpton's book, William Faulkner once sent the manuscript of Absalom into his publisher. It was received by an assistant editor rather than his regular editor. The assistant read the manuscript, wrote to Faulkner that he ought to learn to punctuate his 3-page sentences, and besides, he didn't write clearly. Faulkner cabled back a 5-word telegram. Who the hell are you? Editors are crazy, reviewers drive them. The reviewers really can be awful. I remember reading a review in the New York Times some years ago that began, "You may think it unfair that I, who reviewed and detested the first 2 books of this trilogy, have been asked to review the third." You think reviewers are tough nowadays? They really are not. You should have seen them in the old days. Carlyle called Emerson a hoary-headed, toothless baboon. The toothless did it. Coleridge said of Gibbon, "His style is detestable, and that is not the worst thing about it." Voltaire said of Hamlet that it was barbarous, the work of a drunken savage. Wilde said of a particular performance of Hamlet, "funny without being vulgar." Camus said he heard of a writer who, having completed his first novel, committed suicide to draw attention to the work. Attention was drawn, said Camus, but the critics hated it anyway. Le Figaro said, "Monsieur Flaubert is not a writer." It was judgments like that that led Eugene O'Neill to say of drama critics, "I love every bone in their heads." Had my own experience with drama critics a couple of years ago for my first play, Anne, starring Ron Silver. The play received what is called mixed reviews. Mixed reviews. Unfortunately, the mixture was contempt and rage. In this cycle, writers really are the worst, the craziest. Dylan Thomas, our old friend, was once being introduced by a professor before an academic audience. The professor was bloviating, going on and on about how great Thomas is, the poet of the day, of the year, of the age, of every age. Finally, after 10 minutes, the professor sat down. Thomas went up to the lectern. "I'm known as shithead to my friends." Which was in every way true. The reason writers are crazy is that they are natural loners. They don't like the company of people. Coleridge once visited Wordsworth in his cottage. He walked in, did not say a word to Wordsworth. Wordsworth did not say a word to him. Coleridge stayed for 5 hours, neither man speaking to the other. Finally, he left and thanked Wordsworth for a perfect evening. The simplest question can throw writers for a tizzy. How are you? How are you? Sounds like superficial sociability. How are you? But the writer, twitchy as ever, always hears something else. How are you? Meaning, since you haven't published anything in 5 years, I thought you were in a mental hospital. It's worse when the question is sincere. How are you? How are you? The writer thinks, my God, this person really wants to know how I am. Dare I tell him? If writers were to tell people how they really were, they'd never recover. You know that painting, The Scream? Writers call that painting Serenity. You might ask yourself reasonably why anybody would want to become a writer. It's not a matter of choice. You are born with the urge to show off, but to show off in print, to show off in silence. And if you can't do it by yourself, there's almost always someone in a life who helps you do it. A teacher of books. A teacher of books. And yet they are always maligned, caricatured as poor, pale, bloodless creatures, lacking experience in the real world. I always wondered if the practice of giving apples to teachers was in some way an unconscious mockery of their lack of experience. And yet the teachers of books, what they do, it's a mystery. Teacher of French teaches French, teacher of piano teaches piano, teacher of physics teaches something. Teacher of Shelley or Shakespeare or Baudelaire or Sholem Aleichem or Bronte or Bronte or Bronte or Dante. In high school, I had one great teacher of books. His name was John Beck Shank. Tall, handsome, bit of a dandy, but he changed my life. My life needed changing. I ranked second from the bottom of my class. First was occupied by Tim Brown, but Tim never showed up. That's how smart he was. I always showed up, so I ranked second, head and shoulders above Brown. I don't want you to think I was doing nothing in school. I was an artist of sorts, a cartoonist. I used to draw toilets. I could then and can today draw the fastest, best toilet you have ever seen. You can have your generalists, cartoonists, your Pfeiffers, your Trudeaus. None of them could hold a candle, if they should so wish, to one of my toilets. You look skeptical. Show has everything, doesn't it? Oh, just... shading. These look more and more like rabbits every time I do. You are asking yourselves, what did he do with so great a talent? Well, I will tell you. I used to draw these toilets on much smaller pieces of paper, of course. Fold them up, pass them around class. You'd be sitting around in class, you'd open up your message, and there would be one of my toilets. You'd think, how good can school get? In history, I used to draw historical figures on the toilet. Totally democratic. Lincoln, Stalin, they all wind up on the toilet. Once drew Rasputin on a cracked toilet. Called it psychoceramic. In short, I was the class dunce and the class fool. Teachers would walk past me shaking their heads sorrowfully the way one does at the sight of a forest fire or spilled trash. Enter John Beckshank. First day of class, he looks us over, says, "My name is John Beckshank. In class, you will call me Mr. Shank. What you call me outside of class is your own business." Oh, my God. Could it be? A hip teacher in that school? He was the best. He was the goods. He taught with everything he had, primarily love. He loved books. We overheard him loving the books. And he was inventive. When he wanted to teach us Hamlet, that barbarous play, Hamlet, he'd make us play every part. We built a theater, a model theater, the Globe Theater. When he wanted to teach us what a simile was, what a simile really was, he would give us Canada mints, those thick, slow-melting mints. We'd roll them around in our mouths, and then he wrote, "Okay, tell me what it tastes like. What does it taste like? What does it taste like? Don't tell me minty." When he wanted to teach us precision of language, it was from Shank that we first heard Mark Twain's dictum about the difference between the word and the right word being the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. When he wanted to teach us the lightning, he would give us passages of poetry with an essential word missing, and he'd ask us to fill in the blank, to figure out the context, to figure out the meaning, the tone, the feeling primarily. Fill in the blank. From Antony and Cleopatra, the Purple Passage, as it's called. The barge she sat in like a burnished throne burned on the water. The poop was beaten gold. Purple the sails and so perfumed that the winds were blank with them. Purple the sails and so perfumed that the winds were with them. She's sailing down the river, heading for her panting lover. The air is charged with passion. There's romance everywhere. The sails are soaked in perfume. And what are the winds? What are the winds? Purple the sails and so perfumed in this dizzying atmosphere that the winds were what with them? Intoxicated with them. Wonderful. It's not the word, but it's there. It's the feeling. Purple the sails and so perfumed that the winds were intoxicated with them. A less fancy word. Drunk with them. Add passion to it. What is the languor? What is the feeling of this kind of dizziness, this teenage feeling of being languid and full of passion? Purple the sails and so perfumed that the winds were dizzy with them, drunk with them, intoxicated with them. It's all there. It's not the word, but it's there. It never mattered whether we got the right word. It was close. It was the feeling. Dizzy, drunk. Purple the sails, said Shakespeare, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. Ah, what the hell, it was Shakespeare. And that was John Beckshank. He was a poet himself. He wrote one book of poems when he was a private in the Army. He was also homosexual. Didn't hide it, didn't flaunt it. A homosexual in the Army. Must have been the only one. He was the best. For graduation, he gave every kid in the class a book individually inscribed to that kid. That's how well he knew us. That's how much he thought of us. A few years after I graduated, they fired John Beckshank. He gave low grades. That was intolerable in that school. Only I and Tim Brown could receive low grades. They fired Shank. The parents were up in arms. He went from school to school after that, each a little lower on the academic ladder. But he never lowered his standards. He thought too much of us to lower his standards. He died about 20 years ago, blind and alone. He gave me, for graduation, his book of poems inscribed to Roger Rosenblatt, who needs the push if he wants to join John Beckshank. That's one book I do not lend out. I started myself wanting to be a teacher of books. I was a very poor scholar. I wasn't a bad teacher. But in graduate school, I was a very undistinguished graduate student. I will give you an idea how undistinguished I was. The morning of my PhD orals, I had the orals scheduled the same time and place as a friend of mine who was a very distinguished graduate student, Richard Tillinghast. Richard and I had agreed to meet and walk over to the English department together. When we got there, a professor who knew both of us congratulated me on being so supportive a friend as to accompany Richard to his orals. Richard's orals begin. He goes into the room next door. I hear his orals coming through the wall. Ah, that's great, Richard. Incredible answer, Richard. You ought to publish that answer, Richard. Ah, what the hell? Let's go out and have a drink. Meanwhile, in my orals, only 2 of the 3 scheduled professors showed up. Third had forgotten about it entirely. Of the 2, one fell asleep right away. The other bore the look of someone who had personally witnessed a nuclear explosion. Finally, the third guy shows up, sweating in tennis togs. He'd forgotten about the whole thing, of course. He was very angry at me, as if I'd caused it. He was sheepish to his senior colleagues. I was an undistinguished graduate student, but I studied very hard for those orals. And one way I studied was to memorize poems. I was teaching a survey course in English literature. One poem I memorized was Wordsworth's Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey. I did it because it's easier to teach poems that way, and it's also fun to show off in front of the students. The students could have cared less, of course. But I had the poem in my mind. Back of the orals, in walks the junior professor. "Where are we?" he says. "Wordsworth," says one of the other 2. They both were awake now. Not that he knew, of course. "Wordsworth," says the newcomer. "Wordsworth. Marvelous Wordsworth. Well, tell me, Mr. Rosenthal, how does Wordsworth's wonderful poem, Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey, begin?" Before that son of a bitch had settled in his chair, I gave him the whole poem, right between the eyes. God, you talk about a manic experience, studying for those orals. Bibliomania. Every day, walking up and down in my apartment in pajamas and a t-shirt, unshaven, bleary-eyed. Come to think of it, it's the way I behave now. Books to the left of me, books to the right of me, books in front, books behind, books in my food, books in my bed, books in my sleep, books in my dreams. Books in my dreams. I have those dreams today. My orals fever dream. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That summer I spent in East Coker, Long Island with my cousin Rachel and her hardly constant husband, Tom Jones. They had changed their name to Buchanan and had adopted a son named Pat, whom wisely they had abandoned in the desert. Tom was spending the summer his usual way, whoring and carousing, drinking a potion that turned him into the embodiment of evil, draining blood from the necks of virgins. Same old Tom. I asked Rachel how she was bearing up. "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. See those draperies? Pointing to the draperies. I made them out of my evening gown. I began to worry about her mind. I'd begun to do so since the day she locked herself in an upstairs room of our family estate at Manderley, shortly before burning the place to the ground. At least, she said, we still have the road to Manderley. But that was in another country, and besides, she said, I've just fallen in love with the most wonderful count with the best collection of fluffy shirts. His name is Gatsby, and he's very good. Not great, but very good. At night, when Tom goes catting about, I give the very good Gatsby the green light. Never liked Tom anyway, she said. He is, you know, a Jew. I asked, hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses? She said, yes, he seems to have all his parts in place. But he's changed utterly. The other morning he changed into a giant insect. That's how low he's sunk, Heathcliff, she said, calling me Heathcliff several times in a row, rather too loudly. Call me Ishmael, I suggested. Nevermore, she retorted. April is the cruelest month, I informed her. So what, she inquired. The summer passed. I busied myself with several projects. I made a monster out of the parts of dead people. I hunted for the Holy Grail. I engaged in a duel with a Frenchman with a tremendous nose. I built a low-income housing project, then blew it up. I caught the big fish, then froze it. Soul on ice. Built myself a time machine with which I traveled back to the Garden of Eden, in which I saw John Milton sitting in the tree of knowledge, I observed. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. He assured me you will. I moved forward, fought in several wars. At Troy, I saw Helen of Troy. Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? Yes, she said, but at least I always had Paris. Went over to the Western Front, but all was quiet in the Western Front. Fought in the Russian Revolution. There were 10 days that shook the world. I stayed for 8. I went south, fought with the British 600, then deserted, reducing their numbers to 599. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Not me, I was out of there. Back in Long Island, I noticed that the wars had taken a toll on my emotional well-being. I began to undertake strange projects. I wrote an updated version of Victor Hugo, called it The Hunchback of Temple Emmanuel. I wrote an updated version of Sir Walter Scott, called it Ivan Hosky. I murdered my landlady. She said, shoot if you must, this old gray head, so I did. And I buried her in the cellar behind a cask of Amontillado and a nice Chianti. In my absence, Rachel said, Tom had taken off to an island which was located somewhere between the Emperor Jones's Island, the Mysterious Island, Treasure Island, the island of Dr. Moreau, and John Bull's other island. There he'd taken up with a man named Friday, no relation to Floyd Thursby or Billy Sunday or Monday Monday or Tuesday Weld or any Wednesday. No man is an island, I informed her, stating the obvious. All right, then I'll go to hell, she said. Workers of the world unite, I incited. We spoke of time and the river, of human bondage, of mice and men, and of thee I sing. Lazarus laughed. Atlas shrugged. Back at the bleak house I had rented for the summer, I noticed that the house had changed. Now it had 6 gables. And the people had changed. Becky seemed sharper. Jude, obscurer. Tom Sawyer, Silas Marner. John Greenleaf Whittier, much Whittier. William Faulkner, much Faulkner. The Stranger and Anna Kareniner. I began to feel like a man without a country. I headed into the woods, which were dark and deep. I have miles to go, I said. I began to know a far, far better rest than I had ever known. Call it sleep. Yet as I lay dying, a voice came to me, soft at first, then loud, then quite noisy. It was the voice, of course, of Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer announcing a party in the Hamptons. Who but Norman could have come up with an idea like that? The party was to be held at Count Gatsby's house, and everyone was present. George Apley, late as usual. Oscar Wilde, Thornton Wilder. Tracy and Margot Kidder. Hegel and Schlegel, Sarton, Bard, O Captain, O Pioneers, O Henry. Henry and Harry James, and Jesse James, and Susan Saint. Gertrude and Andrew Stein. Marianne and Demi Moore, and Thomas More, and Clement Moore, and more, and more. Romeo and Juliet, Caesar and Cleopatra, Antony and Cleopatra, Caesar and Antony. Eloise and Abelard, Woody and Sun-Yi, Amy and Joey, Baskin and Robbins, Geraldo and Geraldo and Geraldo. All had come to Count Gatsby's house, to which I brought my cousin Rachel. I left her with the Count and roved about the house. Soon I came to Gatsby's library. It was at once the largest and most opulent library I had ever seen. And yet, this being a dream, of course, my Oral's fever dream, it was also the library in my parents' house. I saw the high bookcase. The bookcase looked higher than ever. How, I wondered, could I climb so high a case? E. Cummings walked in and said, "Why not try a lower case?" I persevered. I climbed a few shelves, found the picture of the man making the violin. Oh, that's how it's done. Climbed a little further, found the poems of John Beck Shank. They gave me a push. Finally, I came to the top shelf. I found a package, books inside, and on the package inscribed a name, Rosenblatt, with 2 T's. And under it, you made it. You passed your orals. I tore open the package and looked at my book. The Road Even Less Traveled Than the Road Less Traveled, by M. Scott Peck, M.D. Let's get down to it. What is it we want from these books? The indispensable, cannot do without, live forever thing. Our minds. Our minds made better, more generous, more sympathetic, kinder, more instructed, bigger. A Greek sailor would sail anywhere, fight anyone, sleep with anyone, rather than return to his child and his wife who was taken up weaving. You could learn something from him. A young man returns home to discover that his mother and his uncle have conspired to murder his father. And he doesn't know what to do or not to do. You can make something of that. Books take possession of our souls. Let's take a moment of silence. In this moment, think of the title of a book that you love. Any book, any name, any title. And when the title occurs to you, just call it out. Just call out the name. Any book. Catcher in the Rye. Crime and Punishment. Say again? As I Lay Dying. Jane Eyre. A book you love. Any book. Say? One World.
Balkan Ghosts.
Say again?
Balkan Ghosts.
Balkan Ghosts? I don't know that. It doesn't matter. It's wonderful. Middlemarch. Say again? Little Women. Dr. Zhivago. Dr. Zhivago. Why Dr. Zhivago? Why did it occur?
I guess I read it at a very period of my life when I was growing.
Right.
There was an angel.
There was yes, wonderful. Wonderful, about angels. And read it when it counted. Who said Middlemarch? Why Middlemarch?
I don't know. You talked about, I read it at a time of my life, and it just meant so much. It's a full, rich story.
These books we have, we never forget them. They take us places we never want to leave, introduce us to people we never want to part company with. Let me give you a memory, not my memory, your memory, our memory, of times we were read aloud to by our parents when we were children. The night, the bed, your mother or your father, and the book. And then just you and the book and the flashlight under the sheets. So you could read well beyond lights out. The light on the book, the light. Here's a story you know, the beginning of a story you know. Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. Oh, Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hands shall not disturb it. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Not a bad beginning for a book, gets our attention. And what's it all about? Marley's as dead as a doornail. A couple of pages later, Marley appears in a door knocker, which means that the dead are not dead, which means that anything can happen. The impossible can be made possible, including the conversion of Ebenezer Scrooge. A hell of a beginning to a book. You know this book by Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. She writes of a country girl named Janie, black country girl, starting life. She was 16. She had glossy leaves and bursting buds, and she wanted to struggle with life, but it seemed to elude her. Where were the singing bees for her? She searched as much of the world as she could from the top of the front steps, then went on down to the front gate and leaned over to gaze up and down the road. Looking, waiting, breathing short with impatience, waiting for the world to be made. Janie's going to have a very hard life, and she's going to have to learn to make her own world. But she does. She does. Here's a book I know you know. Also has a successful opening. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. Good book. Here's another passage from the same book. Well, not quite the same book. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. And they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." The most powerful element in the story of Jesus is the idea of resurrection, of course, and I've always wondered why Jesus chose Mary Magdalene to bear the message that he had risen. Mary Magdalene, a mad woman, a prostitute, in those times a mere woman to boot. Why would he choose Mary Magdalene to bear this most important message? Because if the people believed Mary Magdalene, they would believe anybody. As a plot element, you don't get much better than that. If you asked me to choose a book, it wouldn't be a whole book, it would be a poem. Wouldn't even be a whole poem. Not that poetry is powerless. Thomas Hardy said that if Galileo had said that the earth moved in verse, the Inquisition would have let him alone. Just the last stanza of Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. I cannot read that stanza today with feelings any different from those I had when I first read it as a kid. Arnold has taken his bride to Dover Beach, Dover across the water from France, the eternal enemy of the English. Charles Darwin has just published Origin of Species. Everybody's at war, faith is shattered, the usual. And he's taken his bride to Dover Beach. He looks out on the water and sees the water going back and forth, full of melancholy, full of hope. He calls his bride to the window. "Our love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. The power in that line, in the thought, in the resolution, in the decision, in the sigh. So you have Dickens telling us to believe in the impossible. Zora Neale Hurston telling us to make our own world. God separating the light from the darkness, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. And Matthew Arnold telling us to be true to one another. It all sounds like the same book. I sometimes think that there is but one book, one overarching, superintending book in which all the other books are written. If we should discover that book, our collection will be complete. Books. Books set in rooms on shelves that move round the world until we are enclosed in a single book. Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. Good night.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.